All right, I just clicked go live again on Facebook Live. Preparing to live stream the webinar. Setting up your webinar. Done, redirecting to Facebook page. There we go. All right, I think it's working now.
Yes, it is working.
All right, why don't we start from the top since we're welcoming an entirely new Facebook audience here. I'm Councillor Glen. Joining me is Jordan Moffat. Good evening, Jordan.
Good evening. How are you today?
I'm good. It's been a busy day. It's good to be back here. It is Thursday, January 27th. Jordan works with me in our Team Stittsville office on all of our planning and city hall and communications files. So good to have you with us as always, Jordan. Maybe I'll just spend a moment to go over how this will work, how people can ask questions. So we're going to spend about an hour or so this evening and answer any questions that come in from residents. If you're on Zoom, you can use the raise hand or the Q&A panel to ask a question. And if you're watching on Facebook, just type in your question in the comments and Jordan will be watching for your questions and moderating tonight's discussion. You might also be watching this on YouTube after the fact or on Facebook as an archive as well. If that's the case and you think of a question, you can always send an email to glen.gower@ottawa.ca and we'd be happy to track down an answer to your question or read any feedback or comments you might have. So with that, we'll let some of the questions come in hopefully, and Jordan, I'll go over to you in case well, you usually have questions to start us off. So
yeah, we don't have any questions from residents yet. I have my second monitor here. So when I look over here, I'm looking at the Q&A, the chat, and the Facebook live chat to see if anything's come through. Yeah. In the meantime, I thought, let's just do a day in the life of a councillor. So what have you actually gotten up to today with your job, Glen?
So today was, well, I could go through just hour by hour. So it started just before 8 o'clock when I logged in and checked email and checked social media to see what was happening around the community, around the city. My first meeting was at 8 a.m. with Catherine, who is the casework manager for our team. So Catherine works, we have a team of 4 people who help residents with different inquiries. So could be a question about a tax bill or a question about snow clearing or whatever topic might come up. So had a check-in meeting. I always do a weekly check-in Thursday mornings with Catherine. So good opportunity at the start of the day just to chat about any outstanding local issues. Right after that at 8:45, had a pre-meeting with a couple councillors and city planning staff and a builder. We had planning committee today at 9:30. We were trying to hash out before planning committee, basically a deal with the developer to provide some additional protection for some tenants that may be displaced by a new development. So something that we've been working on over the past few days, really coming down to the wire. So at 8:45, we had a meeting of the minds with all the folks on Zoom and hashed out the broad strokes of basically a tenant protection agreement for this development, just in time to get us to 9:30 a.m. and that was the start of our planning committee. So I co-chair that committee. It meets every 2 weeks. This is the 55th meeting of planning committee in this term of council. So it's kind of hard to believe. That's a lot of meetings. This was a 4-hour meeting. We had 4 items on the agenda. One of them was on Rideau Street. That was the one with the potential relocation of some tenants who are there. And the other one that took a lot of time was the Basilica on Sussex Drive, Notre Dame Basilica. They have a parking lot out back and they needed a zoning extension to basically continue running part of it as a parking lot. We spent about an hour and a half on this and it's complicated. I won't try to explain it, but a bit of time. In the end, I think we came up with some constructive solutions and a good way forward. So that was 9:30 to 1:30. Right after that, I had lunch. And then you and I had a quick debrief. I checked in on some of the ward things going on. We had a call with on a local development file. And then had a bit of time at the end of the afternoon. I went for a ski for about an hour over in the Greenbelt. So and then dinner, and then hopped onto this call. So that was the day.
Is that a pretty representative day for you? You know, you don't have planning committee every day, but every couple of days there's some sort of committee, and every
Yeah.
day you deal with casework on some level, working with Catherine.
Well, today was a long meeting, 4-hour meeting. I'd say we have committee meetings or council meeting usually on average twice a week. In terms of the number of meetings, though, today was quite light. Like I think we had 4 scheduled meetings. That's probably about half what we usually have in a day between me and, you know, internal meetings with city staff or with our team, or meetings with residents and so on. So it was a long committee meeting, but a light day for meetings. And then tonight's a little different as well. We don't usually do, well, I shouldn't say that. Probably once a week we have an evening meeting of some sort, whether it's a chat like this or whether it's a development meeting or whatever it might be.
Let's see if we have anything here. We only have one comment that they're telling us that that the video was working the whole time. So that's good to know. Thank you for that.
That's good.
That's good. Otherwise, I've had a few emails this week that I've had to that I've responded to, and they've all around the same theme. And this is usually in the newer subdivisions, or subdivisions that are half completed or in the process of being completed, where residents know they have a park block in their neighborhood. Nothing is there now. And they want to know when that park is going to become a park and what's going to be in that park: tennis courts, pickleball courts, basketball courts, playgrounds, splash pads, what have you. So how do residents know that there are parks, where the parks are going to be, and when there are going to be parks? And what's the process for a park to become a park?
Okay, there's a lot there. I'm trying to think where to start. So every residential neighborhood these days has at least one park, and sometimes more, depending on the size of it. One place you could go to see where the parks are going to be located would be, you can look up the plan of subdivision for that particular development, and that'll usually show it. Sometimes if you've purchased a home, the home builder will have a map in their showroom that'll show the locations of the park and so on. So that's usually from a city perspective. You can look up the plan of subdivision for your particular neighborhood. If you ever have trouble finding that, just send us an email and we can help you track that down. From what I found over the last 2 or 3 years in terms of timing, usually the parks will be open to the public roughly around when the majority of homes have been handed over to the homeowner in a neighborhood. So the first few people who live into a neighborhood are probably going for several months or more without the park nearby. But once there's, let's say 50-60% of the homes built, that's when I find typically you can be sure that the park is going to open. There's a whole process too. So I know we had a few questions this week about parks in the Westwood neighborhood, so kind of west of Robert Grant Avenue. And there's one park so far, which is Putney Woodland Park, but there's 2 or 3 others, it might even be 4 or 5 others that are planned in the future. None of the other ones have had a start to the park planning process, and we'll likely see that at least 1 or 2 of them will start that park planning process in the next year, so sometime in 2022. And when that happens, you'll see a notice on the city's website, on my website, through my email newsletter, through social media, and so on and so on. And there's an opportunity for public feedback. And then the park planners will take into account all of that, all of the feedback from the public, wish list for amenities, for facilities, and so on, and then come up with a plan for construction. So it's kind of a, someone told me in the west end of Ottawa, in the next year, there will be about 20 new parks that are open. So I think that includes Stittsville and Canada, quite a big area, but we have a lot of parks coming online even in Stittsville in the next year and a half or so.
If you look at the Fernbank Community Design Plan, which kind of guides the development of that Fernbank area, you'll see the neighborhood parks, which are kind of the small parks that basically everyone can walk to within 5 minutes. Then there's the community parks. Then there are also a couple district parks. Those are the big parks, but those haven't been built yet.
Yeah, actually, I'm glad you mentioned the district park. You weren't in on this meeting earlier this week.
Oh,
we had a meeting with park planners on something totally different, and they showed us a draft, what they call a fit up plan for the Fernbank Community Park. We should probably situate where that Fernbank, actually it's Fernbank District Park. It's on Abbott Street, between Abbott and the Trans-Canada Trail, just east of Robert Grant. There's kind of a hydro corridor that goes down there. If you think of roads like Lanceleaf Way, kind of at the south end of Lanceleaf, that big open area, that's all going to be a district park. So a very large park for the neighborhood. And staff do what's called a fit up plan. It's a preliminary look at what could we fit in this park area. And this is a park, it's what would be similar size? Similar size might be near the Canada Recreation Center on Terry Fox Drive. So a lot of different amenities. So in this fit up plan, they just did conceptually, they could fit in a couple soccer fields, cricket pitch, a football field with some seating, basketball court, splash pad, room for a skating rink, a skateboard park is one of the things that they're proposing. So all sorts of amenities that could be fit into this. Next year, 2023, is when the schedule for consultation would happen, and then the park would actually be built 2024 to 2025. So that's pretty exciting. We haven't had a district park ever, I don't think, in Stittsville. So we've got this one in the Fernbank area, and then there's another one that'll be following shortly after, kind of near Canadian Tire Center behind the police station on Huntmar. So some good park planning to look forward to in the next few years.
the types of things that you find in parks and what they were putting in that fit up plan, that was just decided basically, or the strategy was worked out recently with the Parks and Recreation Master Plan process. What's the status on that? Has that been officially passed yet, or was that just the first draft that went through?
Yeah, I believe that's been approved. So that every few years the city needs to update the master plan, the targets for what kind of facilities we want to see at our parks. So they actually look at, you know, the number of residents in Ottawa, and they determine how many skating rinks should you have per 1,000 residents, or how many pickleball courts should you have for 1,000 residents. And they compare to other cities, and they look at public feedback, and they even look at demographics. Like, for example, I mentioned cricket pitch. You know, that's something that probably 15 or 20 years ago, there might not have been as much demand for a cricket pitch as there is now. So with this master plan, it sets out, here's the number of new cricket pitches that we should have in our city. So targeting for more than we have now per capita, although we'll still be quite a ways behind Brampton. I think Brampton has the most cricket pitches in Canada, according to the stats we saw, but covers everything, even outdoor pools and beaches, and even in more informal spaces too. So it's not just about sports fields, it's about community gardens. It could be about just natural areas, woodland parks, things like that as well.
Well, let's move on from parks. We have a question in the chat, the Facebook chat, from Krista. Krista says, good evening. We have been waiting for the pedestrian pathway to be paved coming out of Westwood to the Trans-Canada Trail through the hydro corridor. I know you are working diligently on our behalf to get it resolved with CRT Westwood Group. Do you have any updates?
Well, yeah, just explain for people watching a bit of context. So Westwood is a relatively new neighborhood, just south of the Trans-Canada Trail and west of Robert Grant Avenue. You can see there's a number of spots where there are informal footpaths from the new subdivision to the Trans-Canada Trail. So obviously it's a route, it's a pathway that people are using and using often. We started looking into this last summer to find out what the schedule was for the builder to build it, because we were kind of surprised they were starting to do some road paving and finishing off sidewalks. And we found out that there's a roadblock from Hydro 1 around the easement rights, the ability to actually put a pathway under those hydro lines. So there's a number of spots further east of Robert Grant connecting subdivisions to the Trans-Canada Trail, crossing through those hydro lines. But the proper legal agreements aren't in place with the builder. Now, this was going back to September, so we're trying to finalize that. It's very slow going whenever we deal with Hydro One on these projects. So I'm hoping we can get that and get the paths actually paved, as soon as we can this year. It's an important route. It's a great shortcut for a lot of families get to the Trans-Canada Trail, but that gives you easier access to St. Jean-Paul de School, another route to get to Paul Desmarais High School, an easier route to get to Sacred Heart High School and the Cardell Rec Center. So it's a really useful pathway, and we want to make sure we get some paved paths to make it as accessible and safe as possible at all times of year. Actually, even in the winter, I've been across the path in the winter, even after that big snowstorm last Monday. Very quickly, there was a solid footpath through there. So we know a lot of people are using it and pushing the builder to get that done as soon as possible. But it's got to be the builder, Hydro, and the city who all get together and hammer out that legal agreement so we can make it happen.
We have a hand up from Lucas. Lucas, I'm going to try to have you be able to ask your question live. Glenn, do you have powers to do that? I don't see a button that makes it obvious.
Yeah, I should make you the host for this, Jordan. So let's participants. All right, I can do that. Yes. Okay, Lucas, good evening.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, it's good to hear from you. I think we saw you last week at one of our development open houses. Good to see you again.
Yes, good to be on. And my question is, Glenn, I just this on the 24th of January, it was on the City of Ottawa CBC Ottawa page on the CBC web page, and about with the housing summit that Doug Ford hosted for the city mayors in the province. And my concern or my thing is about about infill development, about those that they propose to have more 4-story apartments in infill development and over like other things and stuff of that. What is your take on that?
Yeah, so the background is last fall, the Premier set up a provincial housing summit with the objective of figuring out how could the province encourage more homes being built faster. And it's in response to the housing crisis that we're seeing in Ottawa and that we're seeing across Ontario, really across Canada, you could probably say across North America. So people may have seen that through rising home prices, rising rents, difficulty in finding homes. So this is what the Premier has done to try to bring stakeholders together, developers, lenders, housing specialists, and come up with suggestions on measures that could be undertaken. They haven't released the final report, but there was a draft report that was circulating. I've seen a copy of that draft report. It was making the rounds of municipal circles and so on. So I've seen the draft report. There's some things in it that Ottawa's already been done and are very straightforward things. There's other things that are probably more controversial. And one of them is the elimination of what's called R1 zoning. And I think that's what you're referring to, Lucas. The idea is that across every big city in Canada and on Ontario, there's a lot of neighborhoods that are zoned R1, which means that you could only build a single home on that lot. And one of the solutions that other municipalities around the world and in North America have used to try to encourage more building would be to make it easier to build, say, 2 buildings on what was formerly 1 lot. So it might be a larger lot that has a much larger yard, has a large home, could be replaced by more than 1 building. So that would be removing the R1 zoning that restricts it to a single detached home. What's interesting in Ottawa, so I always look at this, look at the housing problem in Toronto versus the housing problem in Ottawa. And in Toronto, it's much more polarized, I guess. There's a lot larger area that still has R1 zoning. There actually aren't as many, or not as large a percentage of land in Ottawa that is R1. We have some in Stittsville, in the older parts of Stittsville. And you're probably seeing this approach already through when someone sells their lot and they apply to demolish a home and then build 2 homes where there was 1. So this is already happening in a small way in Ottawa. But it's certainly something that there's been a lot of discussion around. The challenge, and I talked to CBC about this, is I think everyone is affected in some way by the housing crisis. I think people certainly see it. If they haven't been affected directly, they know about the rising prices. But maybe people have a relative, maybe younger adults who are trying to save up for a down payment, very difficult to do. Or maybe older adults who are having trouble finding a suitable place to downsize. Or maybe people who are looking for a place to rent. We have a rental shortage and costs of rents are quite high right now. So I think everybody can see the effect. The challenge is any of the measures that would really make the biggest difference are really hard to get support of from residents. So we discussed this idea of R1 in our official plan over the last year and a half. And we heard, I think, yes, safe to say very clearly from residents in the R1 zones that they were very concerned about what that might do to change their neighborhoods. So there's a lot of pushback against making that change, even though it could have one of the, it's sort of lowest hanging fruit. It could have one of the quickest results in terms of encouraging more housing growth in the city. So, is Ottawa doing this? Well, no, but the province might impose it. And it's always something that we're continuing to listen to residents on and try to understand how to find that balance. I also saw that CBC and characterizing it as 4-story apartments anywhere in the city. And I really don't think that's actually how it would work. There are some very clever architectural ways that you can design buildings that look very much like larger 2-story homes, but might have 2 or 4 or even 6 smaller units within it. So I think that the saying that eliminating that R1 would mean 4-story apartments everywhere, that creates to me an impression that's not aligned to the reality of what's actually happening or what housing advocates and what other advocates are actually proposing. Does that answer your question, Lucas? I kind of went all over the place there, but it's
you answered it, and thank you for clarifying that and just saying your point of view about it. And do you mind if I quickly say one other question?
Oh, for
please?
Sure.
Also on that article, they said something about proposing about eliminating some public consultations to speed up development of buildings. So because that's, I think there's a lot of people like going picking at certain aspects of the development that need to be fixed and some of them. Apparently in the article it said also that the how many months it gets delayed, the higher the price of the development becomes, and it passes on to the new owners. So it's just like, I don't, if I understand it correctly, but like I feel that's not like, that kind of goes against the whole democratic thing about showing point of view. We're not, I don't want to say like, we're not in that communism that one person makes decisions and you cannot oppose it. So it's, we should have still a say of it. Like it's, even though it can delay things, it's good to have public input.
Yeah, you're right. That's another one of the recommendations from the draft provincial report is how could you streamline, well, overall, how could you streamline the development review process? So one of them was for very small developments, could you have a simplified review process or a simplified public consultation process? Like there's a development that includes 4 homes need to go through the same process as a development that has 150 homes, because that's how it works right now. So I think there's probably some efficiencies or a better way to do that, or a better way to get public feedback on some of the smaller ones. One of the ones they singled out was site plan. Site plan tends to be a very, very technical approved piece of part of the approval process. They're looking at things like stormwater management. Is there capacity to handle stormwater or sewage? Is there the proper drainage on the site? Like really technical things. And what we have found sometimes is these get stretched into very prolonged efforts by residents or politicians to slow down the process, when it's actually it's things that are reviewed by engineers. So is there a better way to balance it, not to take away the opportunity for the public to comment or to provide feedback? That's important, but just to make sure that the approval process actually, and the consultation process actually works towards creating a better development, because sometimes they're being used in a political way. I'll give you an example. There's something coming up potentially at Planning Committee in a few weeks, and from a technical point of view, from an engineering point of view, staff have approved it. It's coming to Planning Committee because one of my colleagues is just not happy with the developer, and he's going to drag out the approval process for several months, hoping that'll leverage somehow that the developer will change their mind. They might, but in the meantime, when you stretch out a development, and this is what the Premier's task force, the draft says, it's adding a lot of costs. So is that really the fairest way or the best way? That's not really public consultation, right? That's politics, I think, or that's so it's not about to me, we should not be taking away public consultation from the process, but making sure that it's actually a useful consultation, that it provides feedback that can help make the development better, that can inform planning staff and city staff and inform the councillor about what the concerns are, but not at the expense of just holding it up for the sake of holding it up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thank you for your view, Councillor Gore. Thank you so much.
Yeah, like, actually I'll add to that. I know, Lucas, you were at a meeting, I think before Christmas, about a Carp Road site plan, or was it a site plan, I think, on Carp Road? And
the two-story office building?
Yeah.
That was a pretty, I think we had 7 or 8 residents there. I'm glad we can do these meetings by Zoom because they're very easy to set up. I think you had some feedback, and some neighbors had some very good feedback around accessibility, around privacy, around fencing. This is all feedback that we need to hear as part of the process. Do we have to have a massive meeting in a public hall with, and spend a lot of time and planning and organization resources on that? Or are there better ways that we can create some workshops or more focused one-on-one meetings with residents and neighbors to be more, I don't want to say efficient, but just be more effective, do a better job listening to residents, and make a better use of everybody's time through that process, and less adversarial and less confrontational, and more constructive, and more like a workshop than a hearing type of format.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, it makes sense. It's good to just clear it up about your take on it at these topics, and appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it's important to talk about. Like, we are seeing massive change in our city. We're seeing a lot of growth, and we do need more homes, and we do need more apartments. And there's a ton of people who want to move to our city because it's a great place to live. Quality of life is great. The economy is doing very, very well. But if we don't have homes and apartments for people to live in, we're not going to be able to sustain the quality of life that we have. And but as we grow and as we change, and I talked about this earlier today at Planning Committee, there's a human impact to that, right? There may be tenants who are displaced, or there will be neighborhoods. Every new person who moves to Stittsville is one more family competing for a space at the rec center for swimming lessons, or another car on the road, another person taking the bus. So this growth has an effect, and we need to be having these conversations and understanding the impact, and making sure that people understand why the growth is happening and what some of the options are to try to manage that growth, and also what we need to do to ensure that our amenities and our infrastructure are catching up and caught up to the population growth. But I'm glad you brought it up. Thank you, Lucas.
My pleasure.
My video stream started playing at the same time as I was listening to you, so I had two Glenn Gowers in my ear for a second there.
It's a nightmare, Jordan.
Let's talk about the weather, Glenn.
Do we have no questions?
Usually that's where conversations
chit chat about the weather.
Well, we had a big snowfall.
Yeah.
We've had some pretty big snow, so I think this is a good opportunity to talk about how snow gets cleared. We haven't had. You put out some communications about the last few sidewalks and roads that are getting plowed, and I know that's happening citywide. More councillors have been sharing the list that they've been getting about what's next. So, is there any news about winter maintenance that you can share?
Well, I think, let's see. I think we are cleaned up from the big storm last Monday, first of all. That took about 3 or 4 days, let's say 4 days, to really finish it up. That's a pretty extraordinary storm and a very long time to do cleanup as a result. Normally, when we get a storm of 5 to 10 centimeters, city crews are out there, and residential streets and sidewalks should be cleaned within about 6 to 8 hours or so. Anything longer than that, and it's not good. And we're making some calls to the roads team to find out what's going on. But it was a big snow dump. The cleanup happened. We saw some areas of concern. One of them is around sidewalk clearing. When you get a dump of snow that big, they can't just send a plow along the sidewalk. They have to send a blower. And those blowers move at about 1/3 the pace of regular sidewalk plows. And that's why it took a long, long time to clear those routes. To me, it points to the need for more equipment so that when we do get the snow, we can clear all of our sidewalks as quickly as possible. Like, we'd like to see school sidewalks plowed as soon as possible so we can have parents and kids walking to school have a clearer route to school. We'd like to see more of our pathways plowed on a regular basis, not just sidewalks, but more multi-use pathways that are plowed. We know more and more people have been using them in the pandemic, and I have no reason to think people will stop using them after the pandemic. So that's important. In the next month or two, we're going to be getting a big report from city staff. I know that doesn't sound very exciting, but it's one of the most anticipated reports for councillors, and it's about recommendations for how we can update our snow clearing standards. Basically, how can we do a better job, a more efficient job, a faster job at clearing snow after snowstorms? Believe it or not, this has not been updated in about 15 or 16 years. And we're seeing just different weather patterns, more bigger dumps of snow. We're seeing more freeze-thaw cycles, and our current, our plan for resources, the staff and the equipment, doesn't really match the reality. So I would say by next winter, you're going to see a different standard of snow removal. I'm hoping one of those will be faster sidewalk pickups. I know we've had some questions about the windrows when plows leave piles of snow at the end of driveway. That's something staff is going to come back to us and say, well, there is an option perhaps to add a piece of equipment or to change our process, but here's the cost involved, and how's that going to be paid for? So it'll be a whole menu of options and research about best practices from other communities. So I'm looking forward to reading that and sharing it with our residents as well for feedback.
There's no problem with being excited about reports. That's what you do. That's a good thing.
I should add one thing.
I had a good segue planned earlier with the parks and master plan. I was going to segue into that report, but maybe I can do that with the winter maintenance report. There's another exciting plan that's going to be coming up in the next few years. We've talked about it before, how the process was delayed. It's the transportation master plan.
Oh, yeah.
It was originally supposed to come out a few years ago, but part of developing that plan, staff have to measure the way people move around between their origins and their destinations in Ottawa, and they couldn't really do that during at least the first couple of years of the pandemic. First couple of years. So now the work is starting in earnest, and they're doing some public consultation. We just posted that on the website just before the Christmas break. What can residents expect, or with this consultation, how can they advocate for new projects in Stittsville on what's going to be in this plan?
Yeah, I was just going to see if I could find it on the website. Oh, can you enable screen sharing in Zoom for me, Jordan? I've made you the host, and that means I can't share. Anyhow.
Yeah, that should be working for you now.
Okay, perfect. I'll try to find it while I'm talking here. So Transportation Master Plan, it's this master document that lays out everything in the city around mobility. So roads and transit and bike paths and sidewalks and a whole priority list for all of those. And what you were mentioning was the active transportation piece of that. So I'm just looking for it on my website because the engagement period is on now. There is an interactive map that residents can check out. Okay, I found it. It's got a very bureaucratic name, the Active Transportation Candidate Survey. So let me bring it up on the screen here.
I hope the term active transportation is catching on, but I still feel the need to explain it whenever I say it. Has that sort of a very official sounding definition, but it just means, you know, walking or cycling or even rollerblading or riding a scooter or a kick scooter, electric scooter, wheelchair. It encompasses a lot more than just, it kind of sounds like only joggers.
So if I click here, will this take me to the map page? We asked for Stittsville residents to share your ideas for missing link projects in Stittsville, sidewalks and bike paths and street lighting and so on. And city staff took all that feedback and they kind of evaluated and prioritized. And I haven't taken the survey yet, but they've mapped out all of the locations for priority projects for active transportation. This is a bunch of pedestrian projects in Stittsville. Like if we hover over here, this is one we heard a lot about. Hoban Street sidewalk from Carp Road to Crossing Bridge Park. So you can go in and say whether or not this project is important to you and the opportunity to add comments.
Is that project important to you, Glenn?
It is important to me. This is a road. It's a road that's near a school. There's no sidewalk, not really any alternative route. So yes, this one's important to me. And it looks like you can select up to 5 projects on the pedestrian recommendations, and then you can go over to the cycling tab and look at things here. So that's one thing we're looking for your feedback on. The other one is policies. This is like really, really bureaucratic, boring terminology, but they have something like 70 or 80 draft policies, which are basically new rules to guide how we build roads and sidewalks and pathways and so on. And all of this is available at a website called engage.ottawa.ca. engage.ottawa.ca.
And that's where you can find all sorts of public consultation opportunities as well.
Yeah. So just give you a quick overview here. There's the transportation master plan right up at the top, and solid waste master plan, electric vehicle charging stations. So all sorts of initiatives from the city where you can share your feedback and ideas. Now, one of the next things for the transportation master plan will be about how we prioritize new and upgraded roads. So if you are concerned about Fernbank Road, Carp Road, Terry Fox, Maple Grove, Huntmar, Stittsville Main Street, even any of these major roads, it'll be the new transportation master plan that reprioritizes the schedule to build these roadways. If you have an interest in transit, this will be another opportunity coming up in terms of feedback on the city's transit policies and transit route planning. So it's kind of a long process. And like you mentioned, Jordan, it was actually supposed to be done this year. But one of the things that drives a piece of data that we need to make all these decisions comes from what's called a origin destination study. They look at where people are going to and coming from and going to all over the city of Ottawa, basically trying to look at transportation patterns. And I think we're going to see a shift as we do this study in the next few years. If we'd done it 5 years ago, you would have had a lot of traffic going from the suburbs into downtown. That's probably going to be pretty different when we do that study now. I think you're going to see, compared to 5 or 10 years ago, more and more people who travel from Stittsville to Canada North to the high-tech area there. That's a growing employment area. So the way that people move around our city is always changing and evolving. And every few years, the city does an update of this plan to try to recognize that and what's the best way to give people the mobility they need to get from point A to point B in the city.
If you want to hear me and Glenn talk about transportation in Stittsville more, there's a whole hour-long video on YouTube, Councillor Glen's YouTube page called Developing Story, I believe, number 5, Roads, which has this information and more.
Yeah. So you go to YouTube, YouTube, and search for Councillor Glen. We're going to post this video here later on. Look at that. We've got 152 subscribers. I post my weekly video update here. But the video Jordan was mentioning is right here. Developing Story, episode 4, about roads. And yes, we talk for an hour about the current schedule and what's in the works for the Stittsville area. And another good one was our last councillor chat from November, the development update, where we spent about an hour talking about development, kind of a status of all the housing developments and commercial developments in the community. So lots of info.
Yeah, you just had a big map out there, and then we just went, up and down, left, right, and looked at all the parcels that were currently being developed, and you had markers all over that map by the end of it.
Yes. Yeah.
And
anyway.
Speaking of development, we have a follow-up from Lucas from his question earlier about the housing task force that Premier Ford has set up. Lucas wants to know when you expect the Housing Summit report recommendations will take effect, and whether there'll be more public input on these policies, presumably before June, when the provincial election happens.
So the final report is supposed to be out by the end of January, which would be next week, next Monday. As far as implementation, they seem to want to move very quickly on things. There's some things I think that they could probably implement right away, some that might require a bit more time. In terms of public consultation, when it comes to the province, I don't really know how to answer that. At the city, everything we do at the city goes through committee. Anyone from the public can come out and speak about it for 5 minutes, and then it goes to council. So there's actually 2 points of public deliberation on anything we do. Not always the case for the province. I mean, things will go through the legislature, but there isn't always a clear public comment opportunity. But I would say when the report does come out, if there are things that you are very happy with or things that you are very concerned about, I would say contact your local MPP, Goldie Gamari for most people in Stittsville. And I'm sure there will be an email at the Minister of Housing and Municipal Affairs where you could provide feedback as well. I'm interested in hearing it. I mean, I may be able to work with my colleagues at the city or the mayor to, we will probably be commenting on it in some way. So I would definitely be interested in hearing your feedback on it as well.
We kind of talked about it or alluded to it earlier with you're expecting the TMPs coming forward. You're expecting the winter maintenance standards coming forward the next little while. Are there any other things that you're looking forward to this coming out from City Hall or from the ward office over the next few weeks and months?
Yes. Talk about City Hall. A lot of it's around housing, actually. We have a report coming very soon about inclusionary zoning, which would be about requiring a minimum percentage of apartments or homes close to transit being built as affordable units. So that's pretty important. That's the first thing that pops into my head for City Hall, but there's always a lot going on. Here locally, one of the things that we'll be releasing in the next month or so will be a draft of recommendations for our Stittsville Main Street public realm plan. So we have an exercise. We've been meeting with some volunteers from our community, our Stittsville steering committee, and getting their feedback and ideas and suggestions on how we can redesign Stittsville Main Street to make it function better, both from a traffic point of view, but also things like street lamps and benches, and looking at things like accessibility. So we're going to have a draft recommendations coming out in February, and a public open house as well, where people can have a look at the plans and offer your feedback. So that's definitely a local one I'm looking forward to. We have a number of development files as well on the go. So we'll be providing some updates and some open houses and information for residents as we go. Is there anything that's top of mind for you, Jordan? I feel like I'm forgetting something really big.
Oh, of things to look forward to?
Yeah, local.
Gosh. No, I mean, I definitely agree that it'll be that inclusionary zoning policy is something that has been expected for a long time, and so that'll be really interesting to see what that looks like.
You know, I don't mean to cut you off, but I've got one. So
I wasn't. You're not cutting me off. I was stalling so that you could come up with something new.
I just had a eureka. It's not a city report. It's not a local Stittsville thing, but it is going to be something that attracts a lot of public attention. And it's the provincial inquiry into LRT, stage 1 LRT procurement and construction and operation. There's now a website set up. There's a judge who's been hired, and they've assembled a team of lawyers and communications and clerks and so on. It's a pretty big operation. And councillors, including myself, received our summons this week to produce documents that are related. Now they're going back to 2007. I actually don't think I have any documents that actually apply, but they've asked councillors, and I assume other people who have been involved in some way, to provide documents going back to 2007 on light rail. So could be a massive amount of paperwork for that commission to be delving through, sifting through in their deliberations.
And that report is expected by the fall, correct?
Yeah, is it end of August that they're supposed to deliver it? Unless they decide they need to deliver it in October, then they'll do it then or something. Like it's
something like that, I think.
A floating deadline, but
yeah. But a tight deadline.
It's good. I'm a little skeptical at the short time frame and the amount of investigation that I figure they'll need to do, like how they can accomplish the public hearings, the documentation review, and then their report in that amount of time. I'll believe it when I see it. But I hope it brings us some knowledge and information that helps us create a more reliable train system and do better when we're doing other big procurements, not just for Ottawa, but for any other city in the province. And it'll be the latest in, I think, a couple dozen different audits and inquiries. It's one of the things on my to-do list this week. I've got a list that staff provided of all the different LRT related inquiries, audits, reports, investigations that the city or others have instigated over the past few years. It's quite a long list. So remind me tomorrow to post that somewhere on my to-do list for the week.
Okay. Before we go, I thought maybe you should plug the volunteer newsletter we set up last week, I think.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's one thing I'm very excited about. We've got over 100 people signed up so far. Let me go back to my website. We've always had a lot of volunteers in Stittsville, and particularly in the pandemic, we've seen people step up. So we wanted to find a way to help connect people who want to volunteer with organizations or causes or individuals who need help. So if you go to my website, up at the top, there's a tab for volunteers, and you'll see the Stittsville Volunteer Connection. And right here, please click here to subscribe. You can sign up. And what we're planning to do is when we're aware of volunteer opportunities, we'll send out an email to anybody who signed up. It's very simple and let you know about that opportunity. We have about 100 people signed up, and I hope that we can connect people in need with people who can help them out.
That's very good. Good way to get people involved, especially these days and as the spring comes.
Yeah, people always want to help. Like we had that fire in Stittsville last week. Two families, really tragically, they've lost their home. They were relatively new homeowners, less than a year in their homes, and both lost to fire and all their contents. There were some kids who were involved as well. Luckily, no one hurt, but they've lost all of their stuff. And there are a couple of community GoFundMe pages set up that have raised a lot of money. And we keep getting offers of clothing, accommodations, all sorts of things coming from the community. Like I'm always blown away by the community spirit. When there's someone in need, Stittsville always shows up and helps out. So thank you to everyone who's helped out in this case and keeps on volunteering and helping out in the community.
Well, I think that's a fine note to end the counselor chat on.
Yes.
We have no existing questions in the queue, so that's a nice note.
And we're coming up on our hour, so that's perfect. Well, thanks, Jordan, and thank you to Lucas and to everyone else who joined and asked a question this evening. And we'll try to do this about once a month. It's a good way to just take a bit more time and take stock of things and hear from residents and answer your questions. So thanks for tuning in.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.